Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Today, I have another special guest, two special guests, Paul and Jasmine. They are the owners of Whole Mind Healing Pathways in Prescott, Arizona. They are helping people that are struggling with mental health challenges. They are staples of the community, part of the Strategic Network Partners Group. They are advanced medical professionals here to drop some knowledge, drop some wisdom, and share some of their journey along the way. So, Paul, Jasmine, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Alex.
Yeah, we appreciate the invite.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, let's go ahead and kick this off for people that don't know you. Talk to us a little bit about yourselves and kind of what it is that you guys got going on at Whole Mind Healing Pathways.
My name is Jasmine. I graduated from Yavapai College here back in 2012, and then I went on to get my bachelor's and then my master's, and started working with pregnant teens in the area in a nonprofit, and then ended up working in mental health for over a decade. And so during that time, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and complex PTSD as a result of trauma. And so I was even working as a nurse manager, really struggling with my mental health, and got to the point where I was having pressing thoughts of wanting to kill myself. Every day I was dealing with that. And so fast forward, I ended up, getting on antidepressants, and that helped a little bit. Even with genetic testing, it took like probably four different medications to find one that was a fit. Went through a bunch of stuff with that. And so eventually I ended up trying ketamine. And what I can tell you is when we talk about how it stops the thoughts of suicide, I'm speaking from personal experience. And so I realized, like, wow, this is really powerful. And I've done, of course, other things too. Like I did therapy for years and EMDR for a couple of years. And so the place that we were working at, I was trying to get to see if we could have a ketamine program there. And so we worked on that for probably a couple of years, and we just kept running into red tape and budget things. But now we know something that would really help and is really effective, and we're not doing it. And so as we talked some more, he said, well, why don't we take out a loan from our retirement and start our own clinic? And I said, wow, that's a really crazy idea. But fast forward. And so we did. So it took us about, this was pretty amazing, 3 months from when we decided to when we opened. And we opened in May of last year. And so now we've been here for just over a year. And for a while, I was working, well, both of us were working both places. And we slowly, as we built up more of a clientele here, we're able to leave and just be here full time.
That's amazing. Paul, how about anything to add on your side?
Yeah, well, and if people haven't assumed or guessed, we're married, so this has been a joint venture on multiple different levels. My background is pretty similar. I had a pretty rough childhood growing up. There was quite a bit to unpack there as I became an adult, and I graduated nursing school from NAU in 2012. Later that year, my brother killed himself, and so that was a really tough period. That was probably 4 or 5 years of just really, really rough. Just challenging to process things like that when it hits a family. And so that led to me being on antidepressants. For a period of time, I struggled with substances and was suicidal myself for a period of time. And so I do truly understand when people are coming in with their struggles, similarly to Jasmine, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, PTSD diagnoses that were put on me when I was starting to go to therapy. Yeah. And so I started my nursing career in mental health kind of by accident. And then due to the events with my brother, it really encouraged me to stay. And I've spent my whole career trying to understand how the mind works, why do we suffer, and then how do we fix it. And it wasn't until we encountered ketamine, Jasmine asked me to assist her with this program that they were trying to launch at work. And I started doing a research kind of search and looking to see what articles were out there. And I was astounded by the research. And so then I got passionate about it. And so then we worked pretty hard together for that couple of years trying to get that program launched, and then eventually use that same basis of research to start here. Yeah, and ketamine was life-changing. Truly is an amazing medicine to work with. We both have experience with it. We've both seen how it turns off depression, how it slows the mind down, how it helps with anxiety. It really is super helpful. That's why we are so passionate about bringing it to this community.
Wow. What a powerful story, you two. I mean, that's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. Talk to me about ketamine. Like, I'm really fascinated. I want to know more about what ketamine is and how it helps people.
Yeah, so I'll kind of hit the highlights of the science on it because being with a nursing background, I love the science, and it helps to hear the stories, but knowing like why it's working and what it's doing is really just closes the loop. It affects the mind in several different ways. So it affects all of your neurotransmitters, the serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, similar to antidepressants, also affects your calcium ion channels. But what's really cool is that instead of it taking weeks to months to take effect, it starts working after your first session. And I could tell you, having been, taper on one antidepressant, then taper off, and all of that, like having something that you can take even while you're on an antidepressant and it work rapidly is amazing. And then in my situation, I was actually able to decrease the meds that I was on instead while I was doing this. And then eventually was able to get off them altogether. And today I don't even meet criteria for any of those diagnoses, which is kind of unheard of in the mental health community. And so it's affecting your neurotransmitters. It also attaches to your opioid receptors, even though it's not an opiate. And so what's really beautiful about that is our mind doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional pain. And so it helps with both of those. And then it puts you in this really positive and uplifted state. And so what we do is we do an hour of the medicine combined with an hour of integration, which is people will tell us it's like 20 years of therapy in an hour. And so what happens is it puts you in this really positive mental state and you can dig into the stuff that's going on under the surface without it being really upsetting and causing like this chain reaction of things in your physical body, like you'll see with PTSD. Some of the other things that it does is it blocks the NMDA receptors and then it also releases BDNF. And with those two mechanisms of action, what it's doing is causing neuroplasticity. And so if you have ever looked at a kid that's like 5 and under, they're just soaking in information like a sponge. And that has a lot to do with the BDNF. And so what this does is it opens a whole new critical learning period, which is pretty incredible for adults. And so it's actually pruning off neural connections that we're not using anymore, and then it's regrowing new ones. And what's amazing about that is when you struggle with depression or you have trauma in your background, your amygdala actually gets larger, which is your midbrain and where you sense emotions. And so you're sensing a lot of emotions and they're overwhelming. And then there's a breakdown in connection between that and the prefrontal cortex. And so usually our prefrontal cortex gets a hold of the emotions and downregulates them. So like you get cut off in traffic and you have this emotional response, but then you go, well, maybe they didn't see me, or maybe they're having a bad day too, and I don't really want to be mad about this, and you move on with your day. That's the prefrontal cortex stepping in and saying downregulate. But what happens when there's a breakdown in connection between that is that you experience overwhelming emotions and there's nothing downregulating it. And that's also where you see the fight or flight. So it's like some kind of trigger and an immediate response. There is no stop and think about it. You're just responding. And so this is also part of what contributes to suicide is because people are feeling overwhelming emotions and then things like long-term planning and how is this going to affect others and stuff like that. That's literally disconnected. And so it's just all these emotions and no like ability to regulate and think through and process it. And so what ketamine does is it goes in and it regrows the neural pathways between that. And so inevitably the first thing that we see people say, X, Y, and Z happened. And usually I would have been mad for days about this. And instead I stopped and went, do I really want to be mad about that? I don't. And then I went on with my day. Yeah,
Wow.
it's beautiful to watch. Yeah. And so that's kind of the highlight of the science and what's going on in your brain. Did I miss anything?
Well, I'll cover kind of the background of it. So ketamine is classified as a dissociative anesthetic. So it was developed in the 60s, FDA approved in 1970 something. It is used in surgical centers. It's used in emergency rooms for all ages, from pediatrics to geriatrics. Oftentimes it's called a horse tranquilizer because it is used in veterinary medicine quite a lot. The reason it's so prolifically used is it's extremely safe. So it has a really safe profile. So it doesn't do a whole lot. It's not like someone giving you morphine where it can stop your breathing. People can get quite high doses of ketamine before there's any type of response from the body besides numbing pain and feeling kind of separate and dissociated from the body. And so that's kind of the underpinning of where it kind of came from. In the 90s, there were starting to be some like rumors amongst surgeons that their patients that were getting ketamine in surgeries were coming out saying, my depression is gone, which is not a normal response after a major surgery. And so this kind of started some beginnings of research on maybe ketamine has some effects on depression. And so by the early 2000s, we started seeing more research coming out saying that ketamine was effective for depression. Fast forward now 25 years, there's gobs of research coming out every month supporting the use of ketamine for mental health. Now, while it's a dissociative anesthetic, the properties that we are using the ketamine for in mental health are different than they're using them for in like a surgical suite. So in surgery, they're looking to numb your pain and knock you out. We use much lower doses, like 1/5 to 1/10 the doses that are used in like a surgery. And what it causes a little bit of a psychedelic state. And so while it's not classified as a psychedelic, it does act a lot like classical psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, things like that. And so that's one of the reasons we're seeing it being used in mental health successfully is psychedelics are extremely helpful, and for mental health, they're just illegal. Ketamine kind of is the backdoor psychedelic that's kind of coming in through FDA approval. And you can't get rid of ketamine. So there's, it's a World Health Organization reserve drug. So anywhere where there's reserves of medications and medical supplies, ketamine's found there along with antibiotics and other things. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
ketamine's been around for a long time, and been really well studied. There's hundreds of thousands of doses that have been given in research setting. So we really know what the effects are.
Talk to me a little bit about like who can take ketamine? Like, is this something that's is this the over the counter drug or is this a prescription only? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so ketamine is a prescription drug. So it's a narcotic. So it has to be prescribed by a nurse practitioner, PA, or physician. It's a controlled substance, and so it has, it's controlled and monitored through the DEA, and so it's not something you can just get even at your local pharmacy if your doctor writes you an order for it. It's really like we do it injection, so it's an intramuscular injection that goes in the arm, just like flu shot, and so that has to come from a special pharmacy. We have special procedures for controlling and monitoring that. We have 2 nurse practitioners in the clinic who do all the assessments and write the orders for the administration of the ketamine, and so that's how we're able to administer it here in the clinic. Yeah.
That is, I'm like blown away by ketamine because I don't know why I have never heard of this.
Yeah.
You probably haven't heard of it because it was only 6 years ago that the Spravato, which is the nasal version of it, got approved specifically for treatment-resistant depression. So before that, it was being used in surgeries and veterinary practices and ERs, but that was what changed when they started approving it for mental health. And so because they approved the Spravato, which is the nasal version, then we were able to start clinics using the IM and the IV and all of that as well. And so that's why it's still relatively new for mental health.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So who needs to come to you for help? Like who benefits the most, or like what's your ideal customer client look like that can really benefit the most from your treatment with ketamine?
Well, the interesting thing with ketamine is that the sicker someone is, so the worse off they feel, more depressed, more anxious, the worse their PTSD is, the more response they'll get from ketamine. So it seems like, and we see this in the clinic, most people get to about the same level. But if you start here and you get to here, it's a lot more dramatic than starting here and getting to here. And so really, the sicker someone is, the bigger response they're going to see. They're going to see a more profound response. Now, it doesn't mean it's not helpful for someone that's going through a little bit of depression or anxiety, and they don't want to go on to antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. But really for anyone that's suffering, it really is beneficial. It has very few contraindications. If we're looking at mental health disorders that we can't treat with it, we're looking at, we can't cure someone's schizophrenia with ketamine, but if they're stable, we can treat their depression. Same thing with people who are bipolar, who might have manic episodes. We can't treat someone while they're having a manic episode, but we can treat them during the depressive phase of that. And so there really are very few things that preclude us from treating someone. It's very safe. They can't have, people can't have out of control blood pressure, but we're talking like 190 over 110, very, very high blood pressures, not normal hypertension. So yeah, there's very few things that really exclude a patient from coming to see us and getting treatment.
Our patients range from 18 all the way to 65 plus. Probably a third of our patients have been 65 and older, which has been really neat to see. There are some clinics that will treat pediatrics. We're just not there right now, but I know that they use it all the time in the ped setting as well. And so what's really nice about it is when you're seeing some of these research that they're doing with like psilocybin and things like that, they can't take people that are already on an antidepressant because it's too much serotonin. And so what's really beautiful about ketamine is that people can come in even if they're already on an antidepressant, if they're still unstable, or if they're not on an antidepressant and they want to decrease it. And so that's one of the really cool parts of it. But basically anybody that is dealing with especially thoughts of suicide, because it literally turns them off. That was one part of the science that I missed was it shuts off your default mode network. And so if you've ever driven somewhere and you're like, I don't know how I got there, that's your default mode network. But what lives in there also is like the ruminations, the anxiety, thoughts of suicide. If you get stuck in those thought loops, all of that lives in the default mode network. So it turns that off, which gives you this really quiet mind and then breaks up those thought loops. So definitely if someone's having thoughts of suicide, treatment-resistant depression was the original reason that it was approved. So that's like people that have had multiple trials of medications, it's not working. Anxiety, all the time we see people that come in with like an anxiety score of 22, and then by the end of 6 weeks, it's down to 2. And so very effective for that. Grief, we've had a lot of people come in because they lost somebody and they're just really struggling with those emotions.
Life transitions is another one. We typically split our clients male female, and so I tend to get a lot of guys in like the 35 to 65 range, and a lot of them are going through kind of like midlife transitions, whether it's moving towards retirement. What does that mean for my life? Or they've kind of hit the pinnacle of their career and they're like, what does this all mean? And so it's really helpful in kind of sorting that out, because oftentimes they're coming in for depression, anxiety, but the underlying cause is their life stage. And there's different life stages that can be a little bit more challenging than others. Midlife crisis is a real thing. And I get a lot of guys that do come in for that.
Talk to me a little bit more about that, because that's super fascinating, how life changes affect the brain and how we perceive ourselves and our outlook on life. Talk to me a little bit about that, and what are some of the commonalities that you're seeing there?
Yeah. So there's some pretty strong archetypes of standard kind of profiles that people face, challenges that we face throughout our lifetime. Some of the big ones are, transitioning from childhood to adulthood. So that's, in that 18 to 25 range. And we see some individuals in that age range, but not quite as many. Really, it starts picking up kind of by late 20s to mid 30s to mid 40s. Particularly for men. So for men, the transition point kind of happens somewhere in the arc of their career. And so as they have strived their whole life, they now have a wife, a family, they have cars, they have a big house, they have all of the things that, the American dream says is happiness. And they're sitting there on the throne of their empire, and they're looking down and they're not happy, and they don't know why they're not happy. And so this is something that most men face at some point in their life. It can be delayed. People continue to build the empire, and we see this very publicly with some individuals in the country, where they continue to strive and to build wealth and to build this kind of sense of self and identity. And what typically is lacking in those individuals, because they start to feel depressed and anxious. But the world is telling you, well, you've got a nice car, you've got a nice house, you have a pretty wife, you've got beautiful kids, they're going to good schools. How could you be unhappy? Well, usually the source of that is lack of purpose. And so one of the things that happens around midlife, somewhere in that 28 to 55 years old, is I realize that the rat race isn't fulfilling. And so what do I do with my time and energy now and my money to give back a little bit? And usually that's the transition. And so oftentimes when individuals come in for that, we will, handle some of the childhood trauma, because we all have some of it. We all could have been hugged more and told we were loved more. And, but really it's moving them towards like, what is your passion? You don't have to go build wells in Africa to have purpose. If art is your passion, but you've been an engineer your whole life, like you're really out of balance. And so maybe finding ways to kind of honor the passions and the energy you have that you want to give to stuff, even if it's not something that's going to make you money. And this is kind of why it's a transition at midlife. People typically built up their empire, and then they're like, well, now what? Well, it's like, you still have half your life to live. Even at 55, you could have 35 more years. And so what are you going to do with the rest of that time? Usually the encouragement is to follow your passion, whatever it is, whether it's history or it's travel or it's working with people. Some people go into the healing profession. Some people go into teaching. Some people do different things. So it's really, it happens to all of us. For those of us that don't face it, we know all those guys that angrily work until they're in their 70s, and they have, now they're drinking a lot and they're angry and their family's kind of disjointed and blown apart. It's not facing some of those. And so for women, the trajectory is similar but different. Typically happens around empty nest. So women, when they're kind of shifting through this period of their life, it's when all their kids leave the house. So this could be very different. It could be from 40s to 50s, 60s. And they kind of feel the same sense of like, what's my purpose now that I'm not raising children? And so moving beyond that, what do you do with the rest of your life? And some people transition straight from children to their grandchildren, and that works too. But for most women, they're looking for like, what do I do now with my time and energy now that my kids are grown and out there doing their own thing? So those are kind of how that, and it really does affect people. It looks a lot like a mental health disorder, but really it's a characteristic of the human experience. And so how do we navigate that? We help people with that as well.
I love this explanation, because this is something that I am personally very deeply involved with as well, in helping particularly like business owners let go of their business or transition out of their business and go into a retirement phase or go into that next chapter. So I feel
Sure.
like you're speaking my language here, and like, yeah, like this really is resonating hard. Because what would you say to somebody like that, like a business owner who's maybe 50s, 60s, even in their 70s, they've struggled letting go? What would you say to that person? How do you walk somebody through that process of moving into more what their passion is and running toward their passion in life?
Yeah, well, usually by the point where they're coming in to see us, they've got pretty significant depression, anxiety right off the bat. A lot of small business owners, and we have had quite a few come through. Small businesses are a great place to invest all of your energy, so you don't have to deal with any of the things you have to deal with. So your childhood, anything happened to you in your adult years, all that stuff just kind of accumulates because it's very easy for us to just lose ourselves. 60, 70, 80 hours a week into a small business isn't unheard of. And small business owners tend to be the ones that just keep giving and putting into it. So they're delegating. Really, as you grow, really, you should be hiring people to do the specialized tasks and the generalized tasks that you have within your business. That would be the way to actually grow your business and actually have a life. But for someone that's coming in that's like, say at the end of their career trajectory, in their 60s and 70s, and they're still holding on to a business, it's a two-part approach. It's what brought you here that you have to work and distract yourself all the time. And so that's digging into the past. And once you've dug into the past and you've kind of got through the issues that make it so they have to work all the time, then the conversation transitions from past to present, then the future. And so it's like, okay, so how's your life right now and how is that serving you? Oh, I work too much. Okay, well, how is that affecting you? Oh, my relationships and my families are deteriorating. Okay. And so what can we do now? So we kind of move from a therapy approach in the beginning to like coaching, professional lifestyle coaching. How do you find balance in your life? And then what does the future look like? Do you want to be doing this at 85? Usually people are like, no, but they don't ever see like the hope of getting there. And then what will I do with all this time is the other part. And so it's like, well, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about whatever it is, art, history, travel, pursuing your passion, even if it doesn't seem to have a greater purpose in the world, usually will lead you to something that is very meaningful to work on. So even if it's like, art history, okay, well, you might find yourself, in a town in Europe and you run across an orphanage that needs help. And you're like, oh, geez, well, I've just built this giant empire. I have this, I have all this money that I've never spent because I work too much. It's like, maybe I'll help out these people. There's ways that things come into our path that don't seem to make sense, but they do. And so my encouragement for people is to follow their passion, but you have to work on the past first, because we all overwork because we have things that we're running from. And business is a great way because people give you a pat on the back the whole time while you're building a successful business and you're devoting your entire life to it. We get a lot of positive feedback for that coping skill. And so it's weaning people off that coping skill and moving them more towards a path of like purpose. Where's your interest? Where do you have energy? What makes you get up in the morning? Like, oh, I could get up and do this every day. Okay, that's what you should be doing. So it's shifting that.
And I would say for the females, it tends to look just a little bit different. There's a lot more emphasis on the interpersonal relationships. And so usually there's definitely childhood stuff that will come up, but then from that, it flows into what kind of mom am I or was I? And then from that, it's all the relationships. So then it's my spouse or my partner and extended family. So that comes up a lot. And then the other thing that we see is this shift. Usually people come in and there's stuff that they want to work on that, this keeps bothering me. Like Paul mentioned, maybe it's I can't sit down and rest. And so we'll dig into that. Like, where is that coming from? A lot of really self criticism that seems really huge with the females. And so we'll dig into that. Like, where did that come from? And working on like, I am enough and self love, being able to love yourself and then being able to love others. And there's always this shift that happens. Like it starts in a place of healing, but then it always shifts to growth. And so inevitably you see as people move through treatment, first it's like, I just don't want to be depressed anymore. I don't want to be anxious. And then it switches over at some point. It's like, how do I give back? Like I feel so much better now. And like, what can I contribute to the world? And so it's really beautiful to watch over and over. And kind of like Paul said, there's for every person, there's something that they really want to do or they feel pulled to do. And then there's some way that they see that I'd like to give back to others or give back to the community or be involved. And that's what we're always trying to get to because it's basically you being the best person that you can be or you living up to your highest potential. That's what we're trying to find for you. And it looks different for everyone. I just laugh like it's amazing to see the variety of passions that walk in, and people are being held back by, their past or whatever it is. And so it's like, how do we get through that to get you to where you want to be? And it's so easy to see. Go ahead.
No, I love it. I was going to ask you, like, what's that maybe typical passions that you see people have when they're transitioning in those later stages, and then what's the most crazy passion that you've seen so far?
Well, like to me, a far stretch would be I've had a couple that two different ones that came in that were actresses and working in the acting and the theater role. And so for me, it's so different than what I'm passionate about, like I'm like, oh, don't put me up in front of a crowd of people, please. But like when they start getting into it and like explaining everything that goes into it, like they just light up. And it's like that is their art and that is what they give to the world. So it's not that it's so unusual. It's just to me coming from a nerd background and like very much more behind the scenes that's like, wow, okay. But some of the little things I see people will say like I am doing this, that, and the other for my neighbors, or there's this volunteer thing going on, or I decided I really want to teach a class, or I know of other girls that have been through similar things and I want to reach out to them. Or even like paying it forward, like I know somebody that needs this treatment and I'm going to help them get it now. And so just over and over, you just see this similar theme. What have
Yeah.
you seen for the craziest?
Well, one of the more interesting, and just wasn't a path I would have. Yeah, this is hard because it's like we don't ever pick someone's path. We're like, hey, this is your purpose now. This is what you should be doing.
Yeah.
I had one patient who was an excellent pickleball player, and so he saw how his pickleball playing and coaching and instruction was his avenue in to connect with people, giving him that kind of like deep connection with individuals, giving them the time to talk, also kind of from a point where he has some authority and using that to influence people on, their mental health, where their life path is. And so that was kind of interesting. I was like, I would have never thought of pickleball as kind of the catalyst for connecting with people and kind of being an agent of change in these communities. And for this individual, kind of in the senior community where there's lots of people that are trying to retire gracefully, but dealing with all of their life's mental health issues. And he kind of was like, wow, if everyone could just like unburden themselves with their past, they would be so much happier. And so he saw that as kind of his catalyst forward. You had one individual who, deeply passionate about like Mexican history during the Spanish conquest. And so I was like, go for it. Maybe you'll write a book, maybe you'll do a podcast, maybe you'll write a blog, or maybe you'll just find something interesting there that moves you along this path to the next thing. And so you kind of never know what it is. Every person has a different passion, and it's just finding what that is. Sometimes it's musical, sometimes it's art. It's really fascinating the different things that people come up with as their passions to follow in that stage of life.
I love that. One of the first things, well, not the one, but the first thing that people that I talk to that I have to ask is, will you give yourself permission to start changing, to start becoming that and embrace that next chapter of your life? Are you ready to give yourself permission to do that? What do you see as a catalyst that gets people to make the decision to start helping themselves and moving into a different direction or embracing the next stage of life?
I think that also varies for each person. Sometimes it's severe troubles in the relationship. So family is just like, you're really down, or you're really difficult to be around, or I'm really worried about you. I would say a lot of times family is a big catalyst. And then sometimes to them, just they're like, there just has to be a different way to be. I know for me, I literally said, I will do anything to feel better. I don't want to feel like this the rest of my life. I don't want to deal with these thoughts the rest of my life. And I have patients over and over that come in and say the same thing. I'll do anything to feel better. I just don't want to live like this anymore. And so when you're in that spot, I always tell people that is huge, because now you're going to be willing to do the things like, for us, it's not just giving people the medicine, it's digging into what's going on underneath in that hour of integration. And then we have a workbook. They do journaling, meditations. We encourage yoga, things like that. So it's like, now that you have this neuroplasticity, what kind of patterns and habits do you want to build in? So yes, we were all like, none of us get through childhood. So we all have these things that were put into us. And it's what do you want it to look like now? It's not just about, I don't want to be depressed. I don't want to be anxious. I don't want to be sad. Like, what do you want in there? And so we really start digging into that and putting in those thoughts and those patterns of behavior that are going to give you the life that you want to have.
I would add to that. I would say, because it is a range of motivations for people to come in here. Some people are coming in to optimize because they've already started this process of improving themselves. Other people are just desperate. And I see that a lot. They come in, they're like, this is kind of like my last hope, my last stop. And for men particularly, they're kind of hitting this midlife transitional point. They've worked really hard their whole life to keep those feelings tamped down. But then, once you find some ease, once things get a little bit easier in your business or in your job or career path, then you have more space to kind of mull over those things that you've been running from for 20, 30, 40 years. And so we really do see people come in with a wide range of things that motivate them to come in. I'd say about half the people come in, desperately depressed, looking for just anything to help. And then you have other folks that have researched ketamine, heard it on a podcast, read about it somewhere. And they're like, well, I think this could help me because I have some of these issues, but I also kind of, I'm not in a horrible place, but I'm looking to be better than I was before. And so there's many different paths to healing. And really it's once people can come in and take that first step, that's the hardest part for people. It's that first call. And you hear it in people's voices. They call us and, they leave a message or we'll call them back. And you just hear the desperation of like, well, I'm glad you called back because it was really hard to call. I'm like, I see that. I hear that. I know how hard that is. I don't like making my own appointments and I'm relatively healthy. So
Therapist is another way. A lot of people, they're like, I've been in therapy for 5 years and I just feel like I'm stuck or I'm still struggling with certain symptoms or whatnot. And so their therapist will say, hey, why don't you go do ketamine? And it works out really beautifully because we do what we call episodes of care. And so we'll work closely with their therapist and we try to time our visits where they see us and then see their therapist the next day or two while they're still in that highly neuroplastic state. And so then they all of a sudden start making progress again in the therapy. And then when they finish up the ketamine, they continue following up with their established therapist. So that model works out really well as too.
I love it. That's amazing. That's amazing life transformational work that you guys are working on.
thanks.
That's so inspiring. Let's pivot a little bit. All right, let's talk a little bit about your journey as entrepreneurs and how you have started a business and maybe started a new phase of your life. Talk to us about like that transition and how that has been and the we've already talked about the genesis a little bit, but maybe expand on that genesis story a little bit more.
Yeah, so drinking out of a fire hose for sure.
Totally.
The first thing was finding a location, and our first one ended up falling through, which was a blessing in disguise. But we'd already printed out like cards and things like that. And you know how it goes, you like finally have your spot. And we were like, but then we ended up finding this other one that's really amazing. So we found the location. We had one nurse practitioner that she was one of the people at our former employer that was like, maybe you guys should just go start your own clinic. And so she came with us and then she said, get a second one so I'm not overwhelmed. And so we found a second one that would work with us too. And then we have another RN that helps. And then eventually someone came along, two people that wanted to help with teaching classes and then another one that wanted to help with some of the marketing and networking. And so people have kind of slowly joined us as they've been really passionate about it too. And like either had it worked for them or just like seeing the changes for others and wanted to be involved. And it definitely, I would say the whole leaving a steady income and then like throwing yourself out into the universe, that's probably the scariest part. And so that's been a challenge. And then also the networking. I think it's when you are used to being a nurse, like your work just comes to you. And so like going out in the community and saying like, hey, we're here and we exist. And then also something that's a relatively new treatment in mental health. Like we still, even like last week, somebody said, I didn't even know we had one of these up here. And so it's just a lot of trying to get the word out. And then there's just a lot of confusion. Like, isn't that an illegal thing? Or is that like a party drug? Or isn't that used in veterinary clinics? And so a lot of education. So what we started doing was just seeing ourselves as like part of what we do for the community is just educating. And so every chance that we got to like speak or just network with people and share it with them, we started doing that. We started asking people that were willing to do success stories. So, and then just a lot of like, this is the facts, like this is how the science and how it works and just all of that. And so that's been challenging, but like fun. What would you add?
Well, so this wasn't like our first foray into trying to start a business together. Like most entrepreneurs, even though we were kind of serial W-2 workers, in the last few years, 4 years, we kind of tried a handful of different things. AI kind of took over one of those. We were doing some technical writing for web designers. And as soon as ChatGPT came out, that disappeared in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So we were just getting some traction with that as it started to kind of take off. And it's like, oh, AI took that job. We tried a couple other things. I've tried a couple things on the side. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I was kind of a bit of the oddball out with working a W-2 job and, kind of taking that traditional path. But it's always been a desire of mine to work for myself. I'm a horrible employee. I don't take instruction well. I'm pretty strongly opinionated and kind of want to do my own thing the way I want to do it. You can ask my last supervisor. She just chuckles when I say it. My last couple supervisors are like, yep, you kind of just do whatever you're going to do and it works. But, it's not exactly the way we would have wanted it. I've always been kind of built more for working for myself, but it is hard. I mean, so we went from two very well paying jobs to trying to transition into a business where it's going to have to support us there. And I think that's one of the biggest things that it seems facing new businesses is how do you make enough to support yourself and the business, much less maybe a couple or a few people, depending on what the business is. And that's been a challenge. I mean, we tried so many different marketing strategies. I mean, think about the struggles that we faced. Getting started was pretty easy. Press gets pretty low red tape if you're in the service industry. So we didn't have a whole lot of jumping through hoops with the city or with the state starting the business. So it was really just logistics. So can we get the materials? Can we get the equipment? Can we get the medicine? Can we get a location? And so it only took us about 3 months to open. But then it was like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Then it was like, let's look at marketing. Well, so depending on your industry, ketamine is restricted heavily in marketing. So Facebook ads were the only digital marketing we could do kind of ourselves. And we poured tons of money into that and got very little results. We've done print media through a bunch of different avenues and very little to no response, despite, thousands of dollars going out into those different avenues of advertising. We've learned a lot, and we're still learning it. We still don't really know, besides word of mouth and networking, what actually brings bodies into the clinic. More and more we're finding that as we treat more people talk to other people and they come in. The therapist, once a therapist has decided that we're legit and that we can benefit their patients, they send everyone that's stuck to us, which is perfect because that's kind of what we like. We like, send us your challenging cases, please. They're a lot of fun and ketamine works really well with those individuals. But yeah, the journey as an entrepreneur has been, it's been overwhelming. I mean, up until this month, I was working 2 jobs. And so, it's a lot of time driving back and forth, just doing lots of work in the evenings or on breaks and things like that. It's challenging, and I commend anyone out there that's trying to start a business because it's not as easy as it looks on the YouTube channels when they're like, yeah, just, get a pressure washer and you can, you too can make 6 figures. Like, well, it's not quite. It's not quite like that. Maybe it does work for some people. Then they start a YouTube channel. That's it for them. So yeah, being a small business owner is a challenge. And I think the supporting yourself is the biggest one because it's like, how do you have the time to put into your business before it supports you? Because that's the biggest challenge. It's that first couple of years where you're looking at your business, you're still working a side job, trying to make your bills, but then you're still having to put in a full-time amount of work or more into your business, trying to just get it off the ground. Because you can't sit there in that middle area. That's a horrible place to get stuck. You're just going to be working 2 jobs and burning out. And so,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's been so refreshing to network with other small business owners because they're the ones that are like you said, following their passions, that put it all on the line. They go all in. And it's so amazing to hear over and over, like, I had this idea and then now look at what it's grown into. And so I really felt like more than ever before when I started networking and connecting with other small business owners, I was like, I found my people. This is so exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it is. It's inspiring when you get to, and I really do enjoy doing these podcast episodes because it gets me personal time with you guys and other business owners. And it's hearing everybody's story and what they're building and what they're excited about. It just gets me fired up. So I understand exactly what you're saying. When you find your people in your group, it can take you to heights that you never thought.
Yeah.
But now let's talk a little bit about what is your vision for Whole Mind Healing Pathways? What's the vision here? What are we aiming at?
Yeah. So the big picture, the big long vision is, so Whole Mind Healing Pathways, the clinic, has a sister entity, which is the Whole Mind Foundation, which is a nonprofit that we started alongside it, or we didn't start. One of our friends, and we're on the board for this nonprofit, started alongside the clinic. The ultimate goal is fundraising for the foundation and shifting the clinic and then other avenues of care to a full sliding scale. So one of the things we haven't really talked about is ketamine isn't covered by insurance. And so when individuals are coming in, they're paying out of pocket, which is a huge barrier to entry. And as it is, I'd say 60% of our care is reduced or free because it doesn't make sense to exclude people just because of the cost. We're passionate about people. Business is part of it, but you got to treat people too. You can't just turn people away because they can't pay. That's one of the goals with the foundation, is to move to this system where the foundation will supplement individuals that are coming in through scholarship so they can receive care. And so no longer will it be someone looks at our website and goes, I can't even come close to paying that, and they don't call us. We want it to be so that people are calling us, whether they can pay $1 or they can pay $1,000 or whatever they can pay. And so for the clinic and the foundation, that's kind of where we're looking at moving to next. Now, eventually, one of the nurses that works here, he's looking to open a rehab, so substance abuse rehabilitation program. And so that'll be kind of in the same kind of philosophy as the clinic. So it'll be a sister organization underneath kind of the Whole Mind Foundation. And then the intent for that is the same. It's to make it so it's available to individuals, and it's more of a better service that we can bill for, but also there's just going to be people who don't have insurance that need the care as well. And so using the foundation's resources to cover that. Yeah. And then kind of beyond there, we do have farther out pictures, depending on how our fundraising goes with the foundation really is the limit to what we can do. So one of our former patients, he's volunteered to be our fundraising director. And so he's out actively kind of working towards that end of kind of bringing in larger donors to kind of invest in the vision that is the Whole Mind Foundation, and looking to not just, we would like to build this out so it's a benefit for the Quad City area, but eventually it's going to be a benefit for a farther out, extend its reaches out beyond just this area. So we're not sure how that looks, but at the very least, it would be the foundation funding people's care in different cities and states, even if it's not franchising the clinic.
I think that's an amazing strategy. And I think that that's a totally worthwhile initiative for people to give back and to support what you guys are building, which is helping other people deal with their mental crisis and mental health. This is something that I think our country sorely needs nationwide, not just in the Prescott area. And I really personally thank you guys for championing this cause and taking this up and tackling this in a way that's going to really help. I can see millions of people in the future. So really, thank you so much for what you guys do.
Thank you.
With that, I'll let you guys have the last word. What's one piece of wisdom, entrepreneurial or personal wisdom, that you would like to share with the next generation of entrepreneurs?
I think the one thing that I would share is be careful to take care of yourself too. And when I say that, I'm speaking to myself, because especially when you're in a caring industry and you're passionate about what you do, it's really hard to have healthy boundaries for yourself. And so I feel like Paul's really good about trying to help me balance that and remember that, like, you're trying to do this for the long term, not just the short term. And so just remembering that, sometimes a cancellation is actually a gift. That's like a sign. I'm trying to see it now as a sign from the universe. Like, maybe I need an extra meditation or yoga today, or maybe I need to go for a run, or just like a little self-care time, instead of seeing it as like, oh no, this could be negative financially or that kind of thing. And then also just knowing that it flows. I mean, like, right after I left my other job, we were like super busy, and then all of a sudden we were super slow. And then we got busy again. And so just knowing that, like, it ebbs and flows. It helped us a lot when people told us, don't even try to plan to break even for the first year, and then plan for the first 5 years before you really start making a profit. And so even though our model isn't profit driven, it's just nice to kind of have those thoughts in the back of your head and know that, like, okay, other people say too that, like, you have to put in a lot at first, and then you'll see it start to break even, and then you'll start to get ahead, and just kind of having that hope, because it can feel overwhelming sometimes. And then I found it interesting that it'll be like a little piece of bad news that isn't really that big of a deal, but depending on the day it hits, it feels like a big deal. And so, but then just knowing everything can change the next day. And that's kind of how this goes, is ups and downs and ebbs and flows. And that's okay. Just kind of getting used to going with that flow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I'd say, so first, to anyone that's watching this that's suffering from depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, going through a midlife crisis, transitional periods, grief, whatever, just know there's hope. I think that's a huge thing. So hope on a very large scale, like we haven't seen before. So this isn't just going and getting a pill and masking your symptoms, but truly being able to resolve the things underlying the depression, anxiety, and whatever you're feeling. So there is hope. And we do see a lot of people, most of our clients come through with and get permanent results. So not having to take ketamine for the rest of their life. For a short period of time, they're with us, and then they go back out into their lives. So there's hope now where there wasn't before. For the entrepreneurs out there, man, follow your passion. Don't follow the money. I think you'll find a lot more satisfaction in that because your business is going to take way more from you than you expect. I didn't expect it to be so hard. And I was preparing myself for something that was challenging and difficult to do. And I was like, wow, this is really, it just drains you every day, every week, especially as you're starting. And so if you're doing something you're passionate about, then when you show up to do what you need to do, you get something back from it. But, if you don't like being outdoors and you're doing, outdoor painting as your business, like you're just going to be miserable as you're doing your job trying to make money. The money, and this kind of goes back to our conversation about the midlife problem that exists. Money isn't what makes us happy. We do need money to survive. I'm not going to sit out here and say we don't need money, but following your passion will be more fulfilling and more sustainable long term than just picking a business because it's the one that's going to make money. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that was challenging is I've tried different side hustles, side businesses, is I wasn't passionate about them. I was just doing them because they seemed to make sense and they could make some money if I could get it off the ground. And this is the first business where I'm like, the money's the money, but we're really doing amazing work because I'm passionate about it. It changes the whole dynamic. So that would be my advice for entrepreneurs is follow your passion, not the dollar signs.
I love it. I love it. Paul, Jasmine, thank you so much for your time today. I've learned a ton about ketamine, about mental health, and it's been a real pleasure getting to know both of you on this podcast. And again, thank you so much for the work that you guys do. And for all of our viewers, all their links will be in the description below of this video. Please, 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 if you are struggling with mental health or mental struggles, look them up, reach out. They are in the Prescott area in Arizona. Just please, please, please make that decision to invest in yourself, reach out to them, and at least just have a conversation and get to know what they can do for you and help you through this time of struggle. So again, with that, I say thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.